I have with me Devdutt Pattanaik. Devdutt is a mythologist, and I call him the Joseph Campbell of India, only because chronologically Devdutt came later than Joseph Campbell. Devdutt has brought mythology to a completely new level. He has written extensively about it and continues to write. But what he's done is that he has made mythology very relevant to day living. He's brought it down to the common person and made it most enjoyable. So, welcome to my class, my students. Um, Devdutt, we talk a lot about myth,
Yes.
uh, and I think myth is integral to the Indian slash Hindu civilization. But I'm going to ask you, how do you define myth?
So, myth is the subjective truth of a people communicated through stories, symbols, and rituals. So, it's not integral just to Indians, it is integral to the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
As human beings, we need myth to make sense of the world. Nature doesn't give us a manual of what the world and life is all about. And therefore, every culture, every tribe, every clan transmits a body of knowledge that tells the next generation how to look at the world. And that's essentially myth.
So, myth is a story.
A story can express a myth,
Yes.
but
So,
symbols can express a myth, rituals can express a myth.
ah,
So, story is a component, it's a strong and most popular component of
correct,
myth.
correct. And that is why one word for myth in the Hindu tradition is gathas and kathas,
Gathas and kathas.
songs and stories.
Yes.
And that encapsulates what you're saying, that stories are told, they are sung, they are performed,
Yes.
and they're ritualized.
Yes.
So, but am I right in saying that in India or in Indian civilization, myth has had an unbroken history? That is, we've had myth going down millennia, certainly centuries, and it is alive and well even today.
Well, that is true of all cultures. See, you see what happens is our understanding of myth today is colored by 19th century colonial understanding of the word myth. Now, in the 19th century, the colonial powers, European powers, used the word myth for the natives, for their colonies, for the mythologies of their colonies. So they assumed they don't belong in myth, and those who they rule over live in myth.
Mm.
So this dichotomy that we are in truth and you are in falsehood comes from a very colonial mindset.
So myth came to be understood as something trivial or fictional or
Yes,
false or
yes,
even mithya
yeah.
in
So
Sanskrit.
I mean, the mithya word in Sanskrit has a very specific meaning, but we'll come to that. So we must understand the history of the word myth. So the way for simple purposes, today we have to use a 21st century understanding of the word myth, not a 19th century. We have to update ourselves. And a simple way of understanding this is fact is everyone's truth, fiction is nobody's truth, myth is somebody's truth.
Mm-hmm.
And broadly, myths are of three types. There is monotheistic myth, there is one god. There is polytheistic myth, there are many gods. And there is atheistic myth, there is no god.
Mm-hmm.
So Buddhism really falls in the atheistic myth
Of course.
because there's no concept of God.
Mm-hmm.
Marxism is a atheistic myth, the assumption that the world was once a perfect place, and then there was a battle between with industrialization and commerce. The world was divided into haves and have-nots, and one day there will be a great revolution that will solve it, which is very the mythical structure that you can see in Marxism. You see that in capitalism, you see it in socialism. So these isms which emerged in the 19th century are atheistic ideologies. For me, they're atheistic myths because they tell you to see the world in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
So words like social justice, today we are using the word, it is a part of mythical structures. These are atheistic myths. There's no God, there's no supernatural force, but it's a way of, it's a subjective truth of a people.
So it's a worldview.
It's a worldview. So myth is a worldview, myth is a matter of faith, myth is a matter of belief. It's indifferent to rationality.
indifference, a good word. That is, it can be rational, but it doesn't have to be totally rational.
Rational, we have privileged the idea of rationality in the last, again, it's a colonial mindset, because human beings are not rational. Human beings are emotional. You know, if you're rational, you wouldn't be so, people wouldn't be having so much money in their banks, because you don't need it, you're not going to spend it in your entire life. Why do you have millions and zillions of dollars in your bank when you're not going to use it? No living creature does that, because you have an imagination of your life after you're dead. Like words like legacy, these have no rational meaning. These are
emotional meaning.
These are emotional meanings. These are assumptions that we have granted ourselves to give our life meaning. In Sanskrit, the word for this is artha, to give your life meaning. Mythology is about giving your life meaning. So if somebody says, I don't believe in myth, then you don't believe in meaning. Because how do you give your life meaning? How do you make yourself heroic? Why do you see yourself as a victim? Do you see yourself as a villain? Anybody uses words, as I keep saying, whether it's equality or diversity or justice, all these are mythic concepts. It doesn't exist in nature. If humans didn't exist, these words would not exist.
So, two questions then come to mind. One is, when did myths start in the, I'm going to use the word Hindu and Indian interchangeably.
Of course, I understand.
So when did they start in the Hindu tradition? Because in the Indus Valley, as far as we know, that is where we start the study of the Indian Hindu tradition. As far as we know, we have not been able to decipher any myths, partly because those hieroglyphic on Indus Valley seals have still not been totally deciphered. Then when you come to the Vedas, we have stories of some kind, but not fully formed myths. So what is the approximate starting point of myths?
So myths start as soon as humans become humans. Okay, so let's look at it. The moment, for example, if you're a student of paleontology, which is a study of bones and fossils of animals, when does the study of paleontology become archaeology? When do you say, oh, this is not just animal bone, this is human bone, and really this is a significant sign of culture? So typically an archaeologist will say, I will find a hearth, fire, I will find burial mounds, and I'll find pottery. If you see these three things, you know civilization or human thinking has started. So myth begins with human thinking, because once you become human, you start asking, what is the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? How do I make my life legitimate? Am I living the correct life? All these things come only with a human being. And it took, of course, millions of years of evolution for that to start. So when you see cave paintings, so in, for example, study of myth in India. So, I mean, there are different mythic cycles. There is a Chinese mythology, which is very powerful. There's Western mythology, which is a combination of Abrahamic traditions and the Greek traditions. And there's the Indian cycle, there's African cycle. So Indian cycle, and when you use the word Hinduism interchangeably with India, we are talking about the subcontinent of India, which is nowadays called South Asia. Now, in South Asia, if you want to really go to really ancient part, it's not Indus Valley civilization. It is cave paintings.
Like Bhimbekta.
In Bhimbekta in Madhya Pradesh, which is about like 10,000 years old, and you find signs of hunter-gatherers, agriculturists, pastoralists, chariot riders. You find this whole bunch. We know nothing about them.
So would you call them sort of early myths, as it were?
Because I can't figure out a storytelling pattern, I'm not sure I can use the word myth. So I'm not able to figure out what their worldview is. So I will say that I have data, but I don't know what were they expressing in art. That's art. I've got art, but I'm not able to figure it out. I've just got information. So there are dolmens. These are the Stone Age dolmens in southern part of India. If you go to southern, which are burial mounds with rocks kept almost like stones placed on top of the other, where the bodies would be kept. Now again, we don't know anything about them.
How old are they?
They are very difficult to date, but they could be 5,000 years, 6,000 years, 8,000 years, somehow even 1,000. So it's quite possible while other civilizations, they were coexisting with civilizations. So really, Mohenjo-daro is a much later idea.
Really?
So Mohenjo-daro is about 4,000 years old, 5,000 years old, but they do give you a worldview. For example, now this is what I mean by not restricting ourselves to stories. You should also look at symbols and rituals. Now, when you look at Mohenjo-daro, you see a highly organized society.
Correct.
They are, the cities are well designed, the roads are well designed, the plumbing systems are well designed, which is not how Indian villages are today. which means that worldview is different from the current Indian worldview.
So was that an urban civilization?
It was definitely urban. It was probably central authority, very much like Canada, where every rules and regulations are being
Because
followed.
you see that fellow, the kingly royal figure with that shawl draped across his shoulder and
Well,
so
we
on.
see a man wearing a shawl. Whether it's royal or august is our opinion of it.
Correct.
What do we know is that this kind of a right angle grid structures that you see in Mohenjo-daro is not found in modern Indian villages and cities. It was never there, which means it is a worldview which is highly organized, which is highly central. You know, so it's sort of this shows a worldview which is different from the what we call the Hindu worldview, because which tends to be more fluid, tends to be more disorganized, tends to be more organic. You know, today's worldview, yes, which is very different from this very structured. It's rigid. The brick size is, it is sort of precise, and it is templatized. A word that I don't use for South Asia today, but I see Mohenjo-daro as templatized. So for me, it is a worldview which was an early worldview which came and went and perhaps informs many parts, because our temples, especially South Indian temples, when you see the South Indian temples and the grid structures of those cities and you see some of the measurement patterns, you see that the Mohenjo-daro's organized, templatized thinking continues in the Hindu tradition, so, but it is a tributary of Indian thought, not the mainstream.
So we have a world view in the Indus Valley without a story as far as we know.
Yes. You see, you can speculate. For example, there are seals which show a woman holding 2 tigers in her hands. What does it mean? Or you have a man sitting in a yogic posture.
Or a woman within a tree.
Or a woman within a tree. Or 7 women sitting, which is, could they mean the Saptamatrikas? And these are speculative. We can speculate anything we want. And you know, I'm sure there are some people who believe aliens came there in spaceships. But we don't know much about it. We do know that there is a organized, templatized worldview 4,000 years ago in the north and northwest part of India, which dies about in 4,000 years ago. By 4,000 ceased to exist for climatic conditions. This culture collapses because it was totally dependent on rivers.
Yes.
And then after 500 years post that, about 5 centuries later, you suddenly find a new linguistic form emerging in India, which is dated to about 1500 BC, so 3,500 years ago. Genetic studies are also revealing that what is called the steppes DNA. DNA from the steppes have come into India around this time. They are not found in Indus Valley civilization, so obviously it's after the Indus Valley civilization. So the genetic study and linguistic study suggests, I mean, this is a highly rarefied subject, but we know that there is a new way of thinking emerging 3,500 years ago in India, which was called the Rig Vedas.
Correct. I call it the Ganga Valley civilization.
The Ganga Valley civilization.
As opposed to the Indus Valley civilization.
Yes, absolutely.
Correct.
So, Sindhu se Ganga tak. So, from in the river Indus. So, there is a, you know, I see clockwise movement happening. Yes. They're moving from the Indus Valley civilization slowly towards the Gangetic plain.
Correct.
And then there is, I mean, if you go deeper into the study, there is, it is to the east of the Gomti River and the west of the Gomti River. So they cross the Gomti River. And if you read the Rig Veda, which is the oldest text, there is a sense of movement from the western Gangetic side to the eastern Gangetic side.
Interesting.
Into the forests towards Bihar, what is modern Bihar and northeast India. So there is this movement of people who are, I mean, the worldview which emerges.
Who are these people, the Vedic people?
We don't know.
They're really pastoral people, perhaps?
Okay, so what are the data we have? We know that a similar words are found in the Mitanni inscriptions in Mesopotamia. So there is some idea that probably these ideas emerge from the steppes, the Eurasian region, and they have moved in this way, but they've transformed dramatically. They move from Central Asia, they move into a group called the Indo-Iranian. Then the Iranian groups moves towards the Iranian group, which is the Iranian plateau, where the words like Arya are used even today. And then there is the Gangetic arm. The difference between the two is the Iranian arm displays forms of monotheism early on, very clearly monotheistic, and the god is identified as Ahura, and demons are associated as Dev. When you come to the Indian arm, there is polytheism. There is.
You are now talking about the Vedic period.
The Vedic period. So the Gangetic plains, we are still in, you know, 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. We are now seeing people speaking of many gods. They are speaking of the gods are referred as devas, not so.
So
Iranian
they've
dev,
changed.
where he's a demon, has become god in the Gangetic plane.
The shining ones.
The shining ones. Dev just means the same word for Lucifer, incidentally, the light, the one who brings light. And then asuras become the demons. Although the old asuras in the earliest lines are also mean celestial beings. So somewhere along the line, you see a new mythology emerging in the Rig Vedas. So the Vedic tradition sort of, you get a worldview, and the worldview is pastoral, not templatized, highly aggressive. The god they're worshipping is Indra, who is battle ready, who's fighting. He's going into battle and war. He's destroying cities. And he rescues cows. So a lot of cows are being used, and it's a very materially. They love materialism. So they're calling upon the gods and saying, "Give us cows and horses and grain and gold and women and children." So it's very practical, material worldview.
But it strikes me that the Vedic civilization, as you said, is pastoral and so on. But we have poets there and not storytellers.
Yes, the word is kavi.
Yes.
So poetry is important. See, storytelling as an idea emerges very slowly.
Correct.
And it defines the second part of the
Indian civilization.
Or third part. So if I take the first part as the cave paintings and the dolmens,
Correct.
the second part as Mohenjo-daro civilization,
Yes.
which is templatized.
Right.
Then I come to the Vedic civilization, which is non-templatized and pastoral,
Correct.
and aggressive and military and material.
Correct.
Very materialistic.
Correct.
Enjoys the good things in life.
Yes.
The storytelling tradition comes much later. So it is, I would call it, after the third phase, you have the Buddhist phase, the Shramana traditions.
Yes, the wanderers.
The wanderers. So this comes around 2,500 years ago.
6th century BC.
6th century BC, around the same time as Aristotle, Plato in Greece, Confucius in the Axis age. So Confucius, Taoism is emerging in China.
Yes.
This is when Buddhism emerges. This is the first time you have this rejection of the material world, rejection of wealth, property, power, privilege, and going inwards. The inner journey of India starts. And that's
Correct.
the Upanishadic period.
But would you bring in the giants at this point?
Yes, I will. This is the broad word for it is Shramana. Buddhism is popular, so everybody calls it Buddhist
Correct.
period, but it's a Shramana period.
Right.
The significant worldview shift is you have now moved to an inner world.
Absolutely.
You are rejecting the outer world, and this is the hallmark of Indian thought today. This
Yes.
period makes India what is India today.
And we call this Vedanta.
Now we use the word Vedanta. Vedanta is a much later word. It's less than 1,000 years old. The word at that time would be Shramana, because they were rejecting the yagya, the ritual traditions, the material traditions. They were saying, I call it the hermit worldview, where you privilege being a hermit. Give up the world, give up family, give up responsibilities, go into the forest and meditate. And this was the archetypal Indian yogi emerges at this time.
But yet we don't have myth in its
The storytelling
robust form. It's not yet started.
No, not yet started. This, one can argue it is there a little bit, but nothing to the scale which happens later.
Correct.
So you have, as I said, from the cave painting dolmens, then you have got the Mohenjo-daro, then you have got the Vedic period. Now you have got the Shramanic. This is the fourth phase.
Correct.
And in this creates a kind of a trauma in India.
Yes.
Because you have got the Brahmins whose whole lifestyle is based on conducting rituals.
Correct.
And then you have got a bunch of people saying that, rituals are meaningless. Both within their community also, there are people who are saying that purpose of life is to meditate and to introspect. And there is this tension. And this tension is the ubiquitous Hindu worldview. It is the clash between the hermit worldview and the householder worldview.
Or the hermit and the king as well.
King is a householder. So the householder is a larger word.
Correct.
I avoid privileging elites to the common man.
Right.
Words like kings are dramatic and glamorous.
The yogi and the bhogi.
Yogi and the bhogi. The one
bhogi who enjoys this world materially.
Yes.
The yogi who renounces this world and enjoys the world internally.
Yes.
Mentally, through meditation, contemplation, and so on.
So this is when I say from templatization, we have now moved to the Hamletization of India. We are like Hamlet. Hamlet is to be or not to be. And Indians are always to be or not to be material. And therefore we shake our head, the famous Indian nod. Sometimes we are hermits and sometimes we are householders.
Yes and no.
Yes and no all the time. Hedging your bets all the time. Wanting a piece of every pie. Never committing. Never, or till the last minute hedging. Which is very exasperating to Western people who like binary thinking, early planning, long-term thinking. Indians are none of it.
Yeah.
And therefore,
we
you
keep
understand the
all
worldview.
options open.
Open because of this. This is the phase where it starts.
Of course.
Basically, 300 BCE to 300 CE
Correct.
is this great period of Indian thought between two great dynasties, the Mauryans
Yes.
in the and the Gupta period, which is in the eastern part of India, the Magadha. It is also the time when the Tamil civilization is making itself known. You have Sangam Tamil poetry coming from
Absolutely.
south. This is the dramatic period in India because Greeks have come in, the Yavanas. The China has emerged as a power, and because China has emerged as a power, they are displacing people from China, which leads to Central Asian kings coming to India, what are known as the Kushans. So the Kushans come to India and they rule an empire from Afghanistan to India. So it's a vast empire, and they were the first people to introduce syncretism. So this is
Syncretism in thought or image?
Image and thought, both. They were rulers. They were like, on one extreme we have got Greeks, at another point we have got Iranians with their gods, and then we have these Indian Hindus with Buddhism emerging and Brahmanism. So their coins and art at that time reveals a syncretic philosophy for the first time.
Syncretizing what? All these
things. They were very practical people, and this is around before the Gupta period. And this, I think, played a very important role. The Kushans played a very important role in Indian thought.
So roughly give me the date of the Kushans.
This would be about 100 AD, 100 CE. So 100 BCE is the Indo-Greeks, and 100 CE is Kushans.
Correct. So, but yet storytelling, story formation is not yet started.
No, this is the time when storytelling happens. So this is the time when the Dharma Shastras are being written, the code books are being written, and this is the first time you have the Ramayana and Mahabharata being composed. So Ramayana and Mahabharata is composed when the Indo-Greeks ruled India and the Kushans ruled India.
But let me interrupt you. Would you consider Ramayana and the Mahabharata as myth or as central stories which are not mythic?
Oh, they are mythic for sure, because they are located in certain yugas, which is Ramayana is located in the second quarter of the world cycle, which is Treta Yuga. Mahabharata is located in the third quarter of the Yuga cycle, which is a Dwapara Yuga. Yuga is a mythic concept. You cannot tell these epics without locating them in the right Yuga. Yuga is a cyclical concept.
So you include the epics as myth?
Of course. They're itihasas, which means, itihasa means where the storyteller was present. It has no other meaning. Itihasa.
Thus it is.
No, that's a little translation. Stories in India at that time emerges. You see what happens in this time. The Buddhists and the Brahmins are fighting for power. The Buddhists realize the common man is where power resides, not just the kings. So one arm is focusing on the king, the other arm is focusing on the common people. Brahmins are doing the same thing. They're codifying their structures for the first time. They realize stories is important. So what do the Buddhists do? The Buddhists tell stories known as Jatakas. What do Hindus do? They write the itihasas, the stories, the sagas. These stories were popular anyway. They were there around the world, but they are now codified and located in mythic. All stories are not myths. Myth is when it starts explaining a worldview.
So a story is not a myth, but the myth is a story.
Yes. Myths can be a story. When a story gives you a worldview, then it becomes a myth. The purpose is important. For example, a fairy tale, you will always say happily ever after. So you're giving a child a worldview that when this happens, when like you watch a Disney fairy tale and says if you fall in love and you get the right man or right woman in your life, happily ever after happens. You're giving the child a worldview. So that's a myth.
It's a myth.
If it's just a parable where you're giving good values and all, it doesn't matter.
So the Panchatantra, the
is not
moralistic story.
It's moralistic.
It's not a myth.
Yeah, it's parents trying to control their children. Telling that this is good, this is bad, this is right. But when you give a worldview, where did I come from? How did the world begin? What's my role in society? What will happen after I die? So when you read the Ramayana, it is telling you the nature of the world. This is telling you the story of God who is walking on earth, who doesn't know he's God. How will he function? Krishna's story, Mahabharata. It is a story of war, yes, but it is more importantly this God present in the battlefield. How will he fight? If that was not there, it would have been just an epic and a story.
So at this point, can we introduce a word like Purana?
Yes. So Puranas have not yet come.
They're not yet come.
Not yet come. This is the period when the Dharma Shastras of the Hindus and the Dhammapada of the Buddhists the Ramayana Mahabharata of the Hindus and the Jatakas of the Buddhists is emerging.
So we are roughly now the turn of the millennium.
Yes, 2000 years ago, Indo-Greeks have lost their power, Kushans have risen to power, Indian empires are slowly emerging like the Shatavahanas. Now what is interesting is the first time you see Indian art emerging. What is traditional classical art, but really most of them are early Buddhists. The Hindu images come a little later. And for the first time you see how Indra would look. So the Vedic Indra has made his appearance in form.
In form.
And for example, about 2 hours drive from Bombay, there is the Bhaja caves,
Yes.
where you can actually see the earliest image of Indra.
Really?
And what is interesting is his description doesn't match the Vedas, because in the Vedas he's on a horse riding chariot. Here he's on an elephant.
Airavat.
Airavat. And this is a Buddhist image. It's not a Hindu image.
Buddhist image.
So
Interesting.
Indra appears for the first time in Buddhist art.
So would you at this point say that Buddhists were very early in creating shapes and forms and so-called art rather than the Hindus?
Well, it depends on how you define the word Hindus. The word Hindus didn't exist at this
Of
time,
course,
right?
of course.
You must understand the Buddhist monks were more invested in common people. The Buddha would go and talk to common people. The Brahmins were not interested in the common people. So they were interested in their identity. They were not interested in the worldview of the society as much as in their clan, their jobs, their professions, their survival, because their survival was at stake right now. So we really don't know what the common folk were thinking at this time.
But what happens, Devdutt, is that a strongly aniconic Vedic civilization becomes richly iconic
Yes.
by the time we get to the Puranic period.
Also, this is, of course, could we attribute to the Kushan kings? Could we attribute to the Indo-Greeks who introduced ideas such as stone statues coming? Because the earliest images are Greco-Roman Buddhist imagery. For the first time, you have the nimbus behind Buddha. There are no Hindu gods at that time. But to be fair, the local people, so that is the common folk, the subaltern, if I might use the word, they did have iconography.
Yes.
For example, they would worship rocks,
Yes.
they would worship rivers, they would worship mountains, trees, which is even done today, animals, or they would put things together. For example, even today, a worship can happen of a deity using a pot, a kalasha,
Yeah.
on which you put a coconut and some flowers, and you invite God to be present over
reside
there.
in that.
Now, this could have happened a
So
millennial.
what you're really saying is that there are multiple streams.
Yes.
The Buddhists, the Indo-Greeks, the Kushanas, and the folk stream as well,
Persians.
and the Persians.
Because the Persian Empire was so powerful that before the Greeks destroyed it, Persepolis, it was the center of the world at that time. You can imagine ambitious young Indian princes looking at it and saying, we should build an empire like that. And so when the Ashoka, 2,300 years ago, has these pillars built, where did this idea of pillars come from? It comes from the Persians, who had these Persepolis, which is full of pillars, on top of which there are animal imagery. But of course, the animal images are local. So lion, of course, lion is not local, but cow, the bull. These are local imagery.
Which incidentally becomes the emblem of modern India.
Yes.
1947.
Yes.
Yes.
So
let's go back to
the Puranic period.
The Puranic period is sort of starting now.
Yes.
And we are creating gods and goddesses.
We are creating gods and goddesses. Well, gods and goddesses have now started. Puranic, after the Itihasas have been codified, the Purans emerge. So that's, as I said, around 1500 years ago is when the Puranic literature explodes. And this is what is called mainstream Hinduism. You know, what is today mainstream, the most visible form. It's not the mainstream, and these words have to be used carefully, and especially in academic circles. You can use it in, you see, you could see Indian worldview as a river with many tributaries and many branches. So you should always clarify which tributary you're talking about and which branch you're talking about. Because tributaries form the river and then it breaks into branches. And we may be drinking water today of one branch, not aware of other branches, not aware of the central tree, and not aware of the tributaries.
So true.
So one has to continuously sift between, and that's a good visualization to give ourselves.
So would you then say that storytelling as in myth really comes to the fore in the Puranic period when we have gods and goddesses and multiple gods and goddesses?
Yes. Well, actually less than 33 which are dominant. We think there are many, But if you just make a list of them and actually make
It's only 33.
well, 33, I'm just using it for dramatic purposes, because 33 is a very important number in the Vedic tradition.
True.
But honestly, less than 20 gods.
Less than 20. But then they are involved in so many acts and heroic acts and cosmic acts and so on. And then we build all these stories.
Well, it's very simple. If you were to structure it, then not that complicated. Remember, the conflict right now in the world at that time is to explain the hermit view and the householder's view. To be or not to be part of material world. Does meaning of life lie in enjoying things or in giving up things? This is the big question. So the stories are trying to explain this.
Correct.
And so the stories are very, very simple.
So who do you think, Dev, that stories are born, as it were, from the earth, from the atmosphere, from people? So there isn't one single storyteller.
No, there isn't. But there is a clear school of thought which you can see. And there is a school of thought, the reason you're saying is because you can structure it very nicely. And you can structure it saying that there is the new tradition which is emerging has 3 gods. The Hindu trinity as an idea emerges. And if you look at carefully the trinity is explaining only one idea. So there's Brahma, who has created the world. But his children are fighting amongst each other over wealth and money, and there's war happening, there's sex and violence, and they're unhappy. So Brahma is not worthy of worship, his children are fighting, they're unhappy. So you have the creator of the world, creator of society, and his children are like all over the place. Indra is his favorite son, the entitled prince, is fighting all the time. And what is Indra's heaven? Indra's heaven is described as Swarga. And what is Swarga? Is a place where your hunger is indulged. All that you want in life you'll get. But Indra is not a happy god. He's always fighting. He's fighting his half brothers, the Asuras, and Devasur is always fighting over property. So there's prosperity but no peace. Much like the developed world today. Lots of prosperity,
but no peace.
Because there are the barbarians at the gates fighting all the time. Devasur is happening. So in Brahma, the creator of this world is unhappy, and you have no Brahma temples, right?
Except one at Pushkar.
Yes, but that's like an exception that proves the rule. And this is the Brahma arm. In response to this, there is the Shiva, who is the yogi, the hermit, who says, you know what, the purpose of life is not to indulge your hunger, but to outgrow your hunger. So he sits on a mountain made of stone and ice where nothing grows, and he's very happy over there. And he's meditating over there. He's naked, he's Digambara. He has no interest, he's not hungry. He says, if I'm not hungry, I'm not ambitious or greedy. So he's destroyed hunger completely. So he's destroyer. But destroyer, not of the world, but of hunger.
Of desire.
Well, desire is a modern 19th century word. It is just hunger. I'm not hungry. That's why he's living. Imagine you're telling the story to a farmer. And you're saying Shiva lives on top of a stone mountain covered with ice. He'll ask, but nothing grows over there. Why would you stay there?
What does he eat?
He says he's no hunger. So can I imagine a God who's not hungry at all? If he's not hungry at all, he's happy all the time. He's never bored. He's never restless. He's at peace. And that is Shiva. So you have the destroyer of hunger. Now the problem is, what do you do with a god? How is he different from a rock? A rock is also not hungry. Shiva is also not hungry. So people said, no, this is a good god, but we need something is missing in this story. He has peace but no prosperity. We want prosperity also. So then they said, you know what? This Shiva he has to get married. And he has to be brought from the high mountain top to the earth to deal with human issues. So we need a god who is not hungry, but who understands our hunger.
So what I really hear you say at this point is that stories are developed, as you've been saying, to explain a worldview.
Yes.
And that is how we bring in the gods and these various issues with the gods and the various
So
things.
they don't exist. That's why they're myths. They are not just, they don't have a strategic agenda and saying that if I tell you this story, you will become like this, which is a parable. A parable is classically trying to give you one idea and one explanation. There are different ways, there are technical words. Folklorists are better at this. If you have a department of folklore, you can ask them. But broadly, I explain a worldview. How to think, how to function, how to look at life.
So at this point, let me ask you, what is the relation between history and myth?
Myth is has nothing to do with time.
Mm.
Myth is how you look at the world,
Mm.
and this changes over time. So
See, because
mythology has a history.
yeah, that's the history of mythology.
Yeah.
But mythic figures are not historical figures.
No, this is again a 19th century primitive idea called euhemerism. In the 19th century, they were trying to say Zeus is a historical figure. We try to historicize
Correct.
mythology to explain it, right?
So, but what I'm really saying is that myth can stand on its own without any historical underpinnings.
Yes, history is only a 200-year-old subject,
Correct.
and it became popular because of the Protestant movement.
Right.
If the Protestant movement didn't exist, history would not be so important. It is important in the Abrahamic traditions to locate Jesus and Muhammad and Moses within the historical time frame.
Correct.
This burden doesn't exist in.
Absolutely. This is what I'm trying to say.
It's a burden.
That for us in India and Hindus, we are not required to historicize.
Yeah, it's not important.
It's not important at all.
History is not important. So in the Abrahamic traditions or the Abrahamic mythic structure, so what is the fundamental difference between Abrahamic mythic structures and Indian mythic structures? Abrahamic mythic structures believe there's only one life. You live only once. And after you die, that's it. No other. The Hindu mythic structures, the Buddhist mythic structures, the Jain mythic structures says you live many, many, many lives. Rebirth. Now, if you live only once, so this one life, you want to live it the right way. How do you live the right way? You need a rule book. You need a commandment. Who will give you the rule book? God's messenger. Who makes the rule books? God. So the structure is designed that God, God's messenger, rule book, and one life to live your life. This doesn't exist in India because you're living many lives.
Correct.
And there is no rule book, there's no God's messenger, there's no need for God.
Right.
Jainism doesn't have God.
Absolutely.
Buddhism doesn't have God. There's no need for God. And if you see the way I'm explaining God in the Hindu traditions, it's not God out there. It is God within you. The one who is able to outgrow hunger. The one who is able to be sensitive to other people's hunger. This is it's an antaryami, the one who resides within you, not without. So it's a fundamentally different concept. And in the Chinese worldview, none of this makes sense. It's a very different world.
And the one who is able to create self-realization or knowledge.
Which means the outgrowing of hunger.
Yes,
I'm simplifying it. Because you see, these words were used in the 19th century by the British and we still continue to use them. They don't mean anything. What is self-realization? Simple. Where there's life, there's hunger. Where there's hunger, there's suffering. You want to remove suffering? Get rid of hunger.
But you're using the word hunger in a wider sense, aren't you? Not hunger for food.
Also hunger for food.
Which is the basic hunger.
Which is the basic, which is a very critical hunger.
But hunger for fame, for prosperity, for money, for longevity.
Yes, also.
These are all hungers.
Yeah, there are different layers of hunger.
Correct.
But it fundamentally, you see, why are we violent? We are violent because we want food. So when people talk about ahimsa or non-violence in India, it is about a fundamental level of food. Because in order to feed myself, I need to build a farm. In order to build a farm, I have to destroy trees and forests. So there's violence. I'll kill animals, birds, germs, insects, pests. So the act of getting food on your table involves violence. And therefore the non-violent ascetic will fast. He will say, I will not eat. Because if I don't eat, I don't kill. If I eat, I kill.
All right. So back to Shiva and his marriage.
Yes.
So Shiva is sitting on the top of the mountain and enter now Parvati.
The goddess. Now the goddess starts playing an important role now. She is the world. She is nature, she's culture, and she's telling Shiva, great, you have outgrown your hunger, but what's the use? Until this knowledge comes down to common man. So she brings him down. The hermit is made into a householder. So when you read Buddhist stories, the householder becomes a hermit. Buddha gives up the world, he gives up his wife, he gives up his child, and he becomes a hermit and the wise one, the aware one, the enlightened one. Hinduism is the opposite. The wise one, the hermit who is on top of the mountain, is now become a householder. He comes down from the mountain, abhi shadi, they get married, produce children. So you have this image of Shiva, who is a hermit, who has no hunger, but has a wife and 2 children.
Correct.
So you have seen the householder way coming back to the fore. But this householder is different from Brahma household. Brahma's household is full of squabbles and fighting. There's prosperity, but no peace.
Whereas Shiva's family,
has
happy
prosperity
and
and
peaceful,
peaceful
and therefore you see them in paintings as sitting under a tree, and there's
and
Ganesha
benevolent.
and benevolent
So
and
you worship the Shiva, you worship the goddess, you worship his children. There are temples for all of them. None of the no Brahma temples, no Indra temples, nothing. Because they are not only householders, they don't have hunger.
correct.
So they can pay attention to your hunger. Because if you are hungry, you will not pay attention to other people's hunger. So God is someone who is not hungry, but is concerned about other people's hunger.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore now with this image, now how to live in life, how to live in society. This is where Vishnu comes in, the third Hindu god,
So we're now
who is
bringing in
feminine also. He is an androgynous god. He's feminine. So the goddess quality has come into him. And he takes the form of Ram and Krishna, which is the Mahabharata Ramayana.
Correct.
So you have to understand Ramayana and Mahabharata in the context of Vishnu stories, which is a mythic structure.
Right.
And an attempt to turn it into history is basically following the Protestant model that we are also history is important. That's a very colonial mindset.
Very.
And it's common amongst many Indians nowadays, writing Indians who are very colonized. They are very colonized. Many of them lived incidentally in America and in Canada, and they are no longer living in India. And there's this notion of a view of India which they don't live. You know, it's seen across the world. You see this in immigrant communities.
Correct.
And they don't understand these things. They think that our gods were historical figures. That's a 19th century idea.
And that has led to so many conflicts.
Yes.
When you historicize God, the whole Ram, birthplace of Ram and all that.
You see, for example, I always tell people, Christianity is not based on the idea of Jews' historicity as much as the understanding of the Gospels and the idea of resurrection and the idea of God the Savior. It is not Jesus, but Jesus Christ which creates Christianity. Jesus may be a historical figure, but in the Christianity of the Messiah, the Son of God. These are mythic ideas. These can't be historical ideas. No historian will say God is a historical concept. If God is not a historical concept, God's messenger, the prophet, cannot be a historical concept. So Muhammad is a historical concept. Prophet Muhammad is a mythological concept.
Mm-hmm.
They're two different things.
So back to the Hindu gods, you were talking about Vishnu.
Yes.
How Vishnu appears, and he's different from Shiva.
Yes, he's the householder.
So
Shiva is the hermit who becomes a householder. Vishnu is the householder who at heart is a hermit. So there is a yin and yang.
Again.
A balancing out. So Shiva is saying that I don't want anything, but he's being initiated into the household. Vishnu is the householder who says how to live as a hermit. I don't want anything. Then how do I serve as a king? So Ram is a king. How do I live as a commoner? Krishna is a commoner. Krishna is not a king. Krishna is a king maker. He's a cowherd. He's a charioteer. He's a service provider. Ram is royal, august, privileged background. So if God is born in a privileged background, how will he behave? If God is born in an unprivileged background, how will he behave?
So you have Ram
examples
and Krishna. So again,
and neither of them is hungry, but they are concerned about other people's hunger. And therefore, you see, the word dharma becomes important now. You see, dharma, the best way to understand this is to understand first the law of the jungle. Animals follow the law of the jungle. When humans follow the law of the jungle, it is adharma.
Absolutely.
When they are able to overcome the animal instinct within them, they follow dharma. And dharma, unfortunately, is not simple. Why? Because normal human beings are hungry. In order to eat, they have to kill something. But is killing ethical or moral? So the king is asked the question. There's a very famous story in the Mahabharata. Is a dove and an eagle. An eagle is chasing a dove. And the king, the dove says, save me, save me, save me. And the king says, I'll save the dove. And the eagle says, now what will I eat? And if I don't kill the dove, my children will starve to death. And the dove says, but if he kills me, my children will starve to death. O king, take a decision, who should live and who should die.
So there's a dilemma.
It's called dharma sankat.
Correct.
Ethical dilemma.
Yes.
It is what the president of US is facing today. The prime minister of India is facing today.
Yes.
Who should you feed? Should immigrants be fed? It's ethically and moral to take care of immigrants. However, at the cost of citizens.
So back to Vishnu, and after Vishnu, can we bring in the goddess?
So goddess really is the canvas in which the story is being told.
Correct.
So she's the background, nature and culture. How do you engage with nature and culture? The Brahma way, who is hungry all the time, the Shiva way, who is not hungry all the time, and the Vishnu way, who is not hungry but concerned about the
hunger of people. And the whole story is being played out on the canvas of the Devi, or the goddess,
who is both nature and culture. So nature is wild, so Kali, and nature is domesticated, culture, Gauri. So the domesticated goddess and the wild goddess are continuums of each other.
So that's the canvas upon which these stories of the gods are played out.
Yes.
And that is Hindu mythology.
That is Hindu mythology. Now we see this painted on temples, on stories. They become very popular. They're far more popular than the Upanishads.
So let's come back to the modern times, because we've been referring to it. Why are myths not being produced anymore or created anymore? Why has mythopoesis stopped?
Well, mythopoesis is not really stopped. It's just taken a different form.
Like, would you say Star Wars is a myth?
Yes. So, for example, Hollywood films what has happened today is the biggest mythopoesis is the notion of social justice. Now, this is the big mythopoesis. It is really Judeo-Christian in structure.
So,
it's myth without God.
Communism and socialism and capitalism are the modern myths.
You've removed God, but the worldview still exists. You don't need God for a worldview. This is all, as I said, 19th century notions of mythology has to have a god or many gods. So in the 19th century, polytheism was mythology, but monotheism was religion. In the 21st century, once the atheists became popular, they said even religion is mythology. So all these words are politics. These are political words. And if you talk to a post-structuralist, they'll say these are all structures meant for oppressing people.
But would you say that we in India and Hindus, will we create a new god?
We already have.
Will that god be like, would Mahatma Gandhi become a god?
No, this is again the humanist idea that historical figures became God and therefore Gandhi will become God. That's not true. Gandhi follows the hermit. Look at the worldview. He represents non-violence and hermit. He's Shramana Parampara. He's doing, you have located him in the Buddhist period.
No, so what you're really saying is that we are not going to have any new gods in the Hindu tradition.
You will have new gods, no new ideas.
New ideas. But for instance,
ideas, at a very structural level, human psychology hasn't changed over the last 10,000 years.
No, I agree.
Our technology has changed, but technology doesn't.
And I think I agree with you, like Santoshi Ma, our newest goddess.
Goddess of satisfaction.
And goddess of the depressed women of India, the women in trouble, as it were. So you're quite right that a certain situation has changed and we created a goddess.
You see, for example, if you say, is Santoshi Ma a new goddess, or she appears in the 1970s. However, in folk tradition and folklore, this Santoshi-like goddesses have always existed in India.
Absolutely.
They were called different names.
Like Manasa,
Mangala,
and others.
There are many such goddesses. So it's not a new idea, but yes, you can say that it became popular in the Indian subcontinent in the 1970s. But it doesn't mean it's actually a new idea.
But that is true of Indian things in general, that it is very difficult to say something just came now.
I can do that for all civilizations. If you have enough information, you'll realize nothing is original.
Nothing is new and nothing is original. It has existed in a seminal form for a long time.
Form. It takes a new form. It's a new transformation. So because of the various cultural factors you find, but human beings will always want meaning. Now that's common to everyone.
So then I'm going to finish by asking you this question that I asked you once, and your answer was that we should mythify our lives.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Otherwise, you will not have meaning.
So
someone who has a victim complex, I'm a victim, the world is privileged, I have been denied everything, he is mythifying his life. He is imagining himself as a victim of a great world conspiracy. And that gives his life meaning and fuel every day to be angry.
No, but suppose I'm not a victim.
No, it's all in the mind. Whether you're really a victim, we don't know. I can imagine myself and go into depression. It's so easy.
So to mythify our life for a Hindu or an Indian, does it mean that we accept the myth as alternative knowledge? By alternative, I mean not didactic knowledge as it came from the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Dharma Shastras and so on, but the stories.
Well, didactic knowledge, again, this division again is, I'm sorry, is very colonial structures, which privileged textual traditions over oral traditions.
Correct.
And we should be careful of these structures
Right.
which we have inherited.
Right.
I think every human being has to figure out what matters to him in life. And that human being, meaning doesn't come from science. Meaning doesn't come from technology.
I see.
Meaning doesn't come from university education.
So when you say we should mythify our lives, what you're really saying, if I might paraphrase you, is we have to derive meaning in life from myth.
Yes. And therefore see yourself, either as a savior figure, victim, villain, hero, avatar,
Something.
Shiva, Vishnu, goddess. You define yourself. You give yourself, give your life a framework to
Correct.
function within.
Absolutely. So maybe on that note, I want to thank you very much for this very lovely discussion, outdoors, under a tree, and I'm sure my students or whoever listens to this will benefit. Thank you very much. I was talking to Devdutt Pattanaik, modern today's celebrity mythologist, if I might call you that, but above all, dear friend.
Thank you, sir.
So come again and we'll have another chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.